Good afternoon. My name is John Adams. I'm with the Liberty Cigar Company, and I've got as my guest today Mr. Bill Potter. He's a historian of note. He did his doctorate work at William and Mary, and we are here to tell a story through a cigar. This is the Herbert Hoover, brought to you by the Liberty Cigar Company, where every cigar has a story to tell. We are going to talk to you about the extraordinary life of Herbert Hoover. And I wanted to welcome Bill. Thank you very much. Why don't we talk a little bit about his early life and how his even being alive is a miracle in and of itself. So, yeah.
Well, Herbert Hoover, known affectionately as Bert to his family, Bertie in the beginning, and then as he grew up, he became known as Bert, and that's what stuck the rest of his life. Was born into a Quaker family in West Branch, Iowa. Very conservative agricultural community, one that was centered on the faith of the Quakers. He was a sixth generation Quaker, and they were known for hard work, for their good character, for honesty, for perseverance in times of trouble and difficulty. And these various characteristics of the Quaker community were sort of inculcated in the life of Herbert Hoover by his own family. And he began early on, rather tragically, by actually dying at the age of 2. His father and his uncle tried to revive him, and without success. He was declared dead. They laid him out on the slab, and
Even put the coins on his eyes.
they put the coins on his eyes,
old,
and the family,
European tradition, yeah.
family came in to mourn. And as it turned out, little Bert actually wasn't dead.
That's right. His grandmother actually saw him move, and she said, "That boy's not dead." And his uncle, who was a doctor, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Dr. Menthorn.
Right.
Great name, Menthorn. I don't know what the genesis of that name is, but it's got to be incredible. But he actually performs CPR, revives him.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And then his grandmother says, in the greatest understatement in the history of mankind, probably, she says, "God's got a special plan for that boy. Well, that's why he brought him back to life." And of course, that, like I said, is the greatest understatement of all time, in my opinion, of course. Tell us about what happened next. We'll talk about how it was the understatement of the universe later, but tell us about
Well, with a long 90-year life, sort of the essence of who Herbert Hoover was established in his youth among his family. His mother died, his father died, he was orphaned. I don't remember what age. His
father died, if I'm not mistaken, at the age of 6 of typhoid fever, and then his mother died of when he was 9.
Both very unexpectedly,
Right.
and thus he and his brother, with whom he would be close his entire life, and his little sister were raised by relatives, initially by their grandmother, who was somewhat of a leader among the Quaker community there. And in the course of time, he was transported from working on the farm and learning the values of the Quaker religion and attending church and having his life very tightly circumscribed to being sent out west to live with another uncle, a different uncle.
The same uncle that actually saved his life.
The one that saved his life out in Oregon.
Yeah.
And he was, I suppose among Quakers would be considered a little more liberal than some of the West Branch branch.
Although he still sort of had this sort of underpinning of conservatism that marked the Quaker.
He still had the same character and the same values as other Quakers,
Right.
but he realized that Bert Hoover was something special,
Right.
that he was
Right.
brighter, more inquisitive, stronger in different ways than anybody he'd ever known. His own son had died, and that's why he wanted to adopt Herbert.
So he's 11 years old when he makes the trip from West Branch, Iowa, on the banks of the Mississippi,
Right.
out to Oregon, which was basically beyond the frontier at that time,
Right.
because it was in the 1880s, 1884-ish, something in that range.
Uh-huh. And there he lives with an uncle that puts him to work and builds into him perseverance and strength and self-discipline. Whenever Herbert wavered from the family plan of what he was supposed to be doing on the farm or whatever task he'd been assigned, he was compelled to go do it. So he was very, his life was disciplined, and he adopted that as a personal attribute or personal characteristic. To be self-disciplined.
At that time, that's where the seeds of his entrepreneurialism were developed, because by age 14, his uncle had put him in basically running the office, and so at various times he was even though he's a doctor, he was a land speculator, and he was bringing in people out west and actually setting up land claims for everyone, and so. Bert, as he was known then, actually at 14 years of age was setting up. He was running railroads. He was building hotels. He was doing all the logistics to bring out folks. He would meet them at the stagecoach or the railroad depot and actually introduce them to their new life, their new land, et cetera, et cetera. And he of course began learning how to organize, which I guess is the hallmark of his existence.
Right. He becomes known as one of the greatest organizers of anything in probably world history, not just American history, which he's going to go on to demonstrate in spectacular ways in his future. But retaining the core values, you might say, of his Quaker upbringing, living with his uncle gave him the opportunity to expand his interests and to pursue things that other Quaker boys of his generation usually didn't get to do. Right. So he was a voracious reader, for instance, and out in Oregon, he was able to read Sir Walter Scott.
Right, which of course would have been forbidden.
Yes,
in the Quaker home there was only the Bible.
That's right. There was no Sir Walter Scott in West Branch.
Right. So he reads Robinson Crusoe and Ivanhoe and all those.
And he's inspired. He's inspired by these heroic, novelistic characters, albeit. But he was also interested in history, and so he spent a great deal of time studying, reading history. He was interested in geology and the world around him. He was fascinated with the creation. He loved being outdoors. His uncle promoted that, and that was an interest that would stay with him the rest of his life. Just the desire to conserve the world around him. He was a compassionate man. His family had kind of built that into him. The idea of helping people who are in trouble,
truly in trouble, not the ones that could help themselves, but actually he sort
people
of
who
had a laser focus,
lost everything,
right.
And so he had this intense interest in being compassionate, and sometimes that wasn't seen because he was so self-disciplined. People didn't see that until there was a crisis,
right? And
then they found out who Herbert Hoover was.
Well, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but people actually craved his presence when there was a crisis. In other words, he was the go-to guy, if you want to use a colloquialism from today's world. So he's 14 years old. He's helping his uncle in his real estate mini empire there in Oregon. He has a chance meeting with a gentleman who actually introduces him to geology, and this gentleman meets him. And he shows him sort of the rudimentary aspects of geology, and then he sort of, as is true in his entire life, he takes the ball and runs with it, and he literally goes down to the railroad. And he picks up rocks that were used for the ballast for the railroad, and he studies them and all the different sort of ancient fossilized elements inside there, and he learns to identify each rock, and it's sort of a self-study, which of course, like I said, marks his whole life. So he then gets an opportunity to go to this upstart college. Talk about that.
Right. He's interested in geology. He's interested in mining and digging in the earth and things related to the study of the earth. And so the family examined all of the Quaker colleges in the country. In fact, they really started at Earlham College back in Indiana, but Earlham didn't have at the time didn't have a geology major.
None of them did, right?
And what's that?
None of them did.
Oh, none of them did. They started with the best, and then they worked their way down. And
got slim pickings. Yeah.
No Quaker colleges had geology, but there was a multi-millionaire Californian, Leland Stanford, an industrialist. A philanthropic man, and one who desired to start an institute of higher education that would have those kinds of majors included, especially geology. And it's a university that's going to take his name eventually. And Herbert Hoover wants to pursue that, and his uncle agrees that he ought to try it. Now, in high school, he didn't go to high school.
That's exactly right. I was going to bring that up, but before we talk about that, the only reason he let him go to Stanford ultimately was because one of the main professors there was actually a Quaker. And the family, of course, had been against it. And of course, in that sort of Quaker community, everybody's got to agree, or it's no dice, as it were. But the preeminent professor that is going to be employed there is actually a Quaker, and they reason that if it's good enough for this Quaker, then it's good enough for
right.
Bert.
And he's eventually going to take Bert under his wing when he attends there.
Right.
But his uncle allowed him. He asked his uncle if he could learn some other subjects that would help him in going to college. And so he went to night school. He worked all day long on the farm and in the other enterprises that he was involved in. And at night he took night school, and he learned Latin, and he learned mathematics and physics and the kinds of things that are going to bolster his career.
But he had
eventually.
one subject that was like his eternal nemesis, which was English. He had to pass the 1B exam, which was an entry-level examination for English, right?
That's right, and he duffed it for sure.
And he was admitted to Stanford on the sort of the auspices of his capability and all the other subjects, but they said they made an exception for him and said, before you graduate, you have to pass this exam. And he never did.
No, he never passed it.
And
they stamped him passed, though.
Yeah, they actually took one of his geology papers, and they asked them to grade his sort of grammatical expertise, what have you, acumen on that particular paper, and they sort of made a huge exception, and it was owing to his exceptional nature everywhere else, including his character.
So there are all these little elements that come into his life prior to his formal education that are all going to be building blocks in who he becomes. Really, he was one of the greatest men of his age, and every biographer of him who looks back on the life of Hoover, they see all of these unlikely elements that came into his life that he absorbed, and they became part of him. And then as he matured, they enabled him to accomplish things that no other human being ever accomplished.
Yeah, typically, people go through their entire lives looking for life's main chance. Some people seize it, some people don't. But to him, everything was a chance. In other words, everything was an opportunity. There was a seed or a kernel of potential in everything that he looked at. And he truly sort of personified, first of all, he never shirked responsibility when he made a mistake. And oddly enough, as great as he was, he never really took credit himself, which is the reason why history has sort of been unfriendly to him. If you look at the textbooks now, if he's ever even in there at all, it talks about Hooverville and the fact that he failed as the president in the Great Depression. But and we'll talk about this in a few minutes. But he actually could have prevented both of those if people only listened to him when he was in the Commerce Department. As we're moving through his life, let's talk about Lou. He meets this bright-eyed, brilliant girl, blue-eyed, vibrant, athletic woman who actually turns out to be the first geology graduate, female in the country.
First female geology graduate.
And she actually has better grades than him. And she speaks 5 languages. I mean, she's a brilliant woman. So tell us about Lou and how he sort of bonded to her.
Well, when he met her, I think at first in a class, and saw, her brilliance, her vitality, he fell instantly, madly in love. But he'd never
had a girlfriend.
No, he had never had any relationship with.
He was milking cows.
With women before, and she was everything that he probably had imagined over the years. All of a sudden came together in this one person, and he was determined to woo her. But he was perceived as kind of a unsociable person.
Well, he had this sort of
no
low-born sort of
He had no
beginning,
skills.
Right.
I mean, he had no skills. And he was told by his roommates, you're going to pursue a girl, you have to take her to a dance. Well, Quakers don't dance. You know, there are various things that you're going to have to acquire, various
in the courtship,
in the
realm,
courtship process. And so he learned how to dance. He was never good at it.
Right.
And of course, Quakers didn't smoke cigars, but that's something he acquired and pursued all of his life.
Well, I don't fault him for that.
No, we admire him for that. But that's one of the interesting things about him when he was confronted later in life. When he was asked about various, he learned how to play cards, and he liked to play cards, and he liked to smoke cigars, and he learned how to dance, and various things that Quakers in that day did not pursue. In fact, they were opposed to them. And his response to that was that in his own life, he buried deeply into his soul all the basic principles of his faith, but the externals were things that varied from person to person and age to age. And so he held on to the principal things, what we would call the ethical values of his life. But on the other aspects of his life, the social aspects of his life, and his work and his intellectual pursuits, he saw that as kind of within the area of Christian liberty, if you will, and pursued different things that way. Well, as he pursued Lou, he found out that she was just a very superior individual. In fact, he had learned Latin in high school. She was a master of the Latin language, and I mean, she could speak 5 languages, and she could translate Latin. That's going to come into play in their lives later on.
Absolutely. So she actually had the same sort of affection for him. She was obviously an attractive young lady. She had many suitors, many of which were obviously of a higher station, very wealthy. But she really saw something in him that all the other seminal people in his life did, or early in his life. She saw the potential for greatness. And in fact, her comment was, at Stanford, I majored in geology. After I graduated, I majored in Herbert Hoover. She was that enamored by him, although at the time he didn't know it.
And it came together so perfectly in their marriage. She was pursuing something that no mining company would ever allow a woman to do. I mean, she wanted to go down in the mines and look at the seams and study the geology, and that just wasn't going to happen in that particular day.
It did. As the mines were in these third world countries, if you will, they had superstitions about women going in the mines. It was considered bad luck. You know, if a woman goes down in the mine shaft, then you know the mine is going to fail, and you know people are going to die and stuff. So they were very reticent about that.
But she married the greatest mining engineer in history. At least one of the greatest mining engineers in history, and she got to do exactly what she loved,
right,
alongside the man that she loved. She got to pursue her geological interests along with her husband. So they were just the perfect match.
Indeed. So he was a senior, she's a freshman.
Right.
He graduates right when the Panic of 1893 occurs, which panic is the colloquialism in that day for depression. So the 1893 was not nearly as bad as the Great Depression, but it was darn near it.
It's a big economic downturn that cost.
So he graduates, and he's considered to be the top geologist student in Stanford, but there's no job. And he does what he has always done. He takes a lesser place because he knows darn well he's going to prove himself. So he takes the job as the secretary of a French mining engineer, and then the mining engineer figures out what everybody else will eventually, that he's extraordinary, and starts to promote him again and again. So talk about his. He's a young man at this point. I mean,
yes.
we look at all these pictures. He's 40 in this one here, but
early 20s.
Early 20s.
Yeah.
And where does he go?
I don't know.
He goes to. He goes.
I need to relight my cigar.
Well, good. I'll talk while you do that. Go ahead.
Take a time out.
He goes to Australia. He gets stationed in Western Australia, which they consider it the outback now. We have these wonderful beer commercials about it, but it is literally in the middle of nowhere. Australia is a small, underpopulated giant island. They call it a continent, but it's a tiny place. And he goes there. He's 21, 22 years old and knows nothing about the world. And he gets dropped into the outback. And he starts to learn how to deal with the different cultures at that point. In other words, his biggest culture shock was going from West Branch, Iowa to Oregon. Now he's placed literally halfway around the world in Australia. And he's given a lot of responsibility that a 21-year-old normally doesn't get.
No, and he figures things out. I mean, he's put in situations where he hasn't been there before, but he understands the principles, and he goes down into the mines and he does the calculations, and because of his, today he'd be called the ultimate efficiency expert. He hated waste, he hated ill discipline, and he brought those characteristics to the pursuit of geology and mining, and today they'd say he rationalized the coal mining industry in Australia and turned it into a hugely profitable thing. It's interesting too, he's not married yet. She's still at Stanford.
Yeah, she's still
and she's determined to graduate.
Yeah.
So he has to wait for her for 3 years. Right. And he has a little fear that Lou's going to
because she's got many suitors,
but she is single-minded in her purpose. She goes through the school. So they're separated really most of the time for the next 3 years.
So in Australia, he starts to build his wealth. He does what he always does. He excels and becomes valuable to his employer. His employer gives him a piece of the business, and he's one of the rare wealthy individuals who actually starts giving back, even before he even makes his fortune. In other words, he's sending money back to Stanford to his brother Tad and to his sister for them to go to school, waiting for her to graduate. So she graduates. He comes back to the States, and then he gets stationed in China, of all places, which is a very interesting story. She comes with him.
She goes with him to China, and in the course of his years in China, he's connected with a particular Chinese mining interest.
Chang, yeah.
Mr. Chang, and he takes him to various places around China. In fact, Mr. Chang is convinced there's lots of gold in China.
Right.
And all the gold mines have been tapped out.
Right.
But he's just sure that country,
over millennia.
The country is so huge that it's so big that he's just convinced there's more gold. And he sends Herbert Hoover all over China. I mean, he sends him on all of these wasted trips to the far reaches of China. And he doesn't find gold because it really has been tapped out for the most part, at least in the initial years. But he finds other
base metals like zinc
base
and copper
metals and things that they're not really aware of the importance and the wealth that's
they were literally going for the gold, but there was so much wealth that was on the table, and he found it. At that point, he develops, somewhere in that process, he actually develops a revolutionary way to extract those base metals out of the slag or slug. I've forgotten the operative term, but the waste while they were looking for gold, and that is where there is economic opportunity for the owners of the mines and himself.
Right, and he's going to build a fortune in China that's going to eventually employ 125,000 people, and historians claim that really at the peak, not at this time in China, but cumulatively until World War I starts, and he employs about 1 million people.
Right, which is more than anybody. I mean, Amazon, I think I read it yesterday, has 300,000 employees or so. I mean, it's amazing the amount of, and he managed all that, which of course is a testament.
He did. I mean, he's 25 years old, and he's a multimillionaire with a built-in philanthropic idea of helping others through what he's doing. But even on top of that, the reinvestment in the mining industry, he learns economics. I mean, he understands how it works. And right in the middle of this building his fortune and expanding the mining interests of his employer in China, a revolution takes place among a certain segment of the Chinese people
who are rejecting Western values and the Western infiltration of the country. And
in particular, they're rejecting Christianity. They begin by massacring as many Chinese Christians as they can and missionaries.
Right.
And a crisis ensues, which becomes known as the Boxer Rebellion.
Which is the Western name for it, but in China it was called the Righteous Fist.
The Righteous Fists.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
So they get caught in a compound. Which was not well defended.
No, they're in Beijing with 300 other people, and there are 140,000 Boxer troops.
Right. So, but the Righteous Fist is not very organized. Thank God.
They are not well organized.
So, and this is where Lou comes in to the picture, because she is not only the dutiful wife, but she's in a lot of ways her sort of adventurous nature and her brilliance and everything exceeded his in certain ways. So she's tending to the wounded. She's actually going outside the compound and with a bike, and she's got a .35 revolver on her hip and to protect herself. And Quakers never intended to use it, but they felt more comfortable when they had a gun with them. Neither one of them ever fired a shot, but they at one point he asked for a rifle because it got a little overwhelming. But she's riding out to actually help attend to the wound, and she gets a rocket, blows her front tire off.
Right, an artillery shell blows the tire right off her bicycle, and she keeps on going and does whatever task she was doing secretly between the lines, and even within the legation. He's organizing the legations turn to him.
Yeah, and he's 25 years
to
old.
To organize the defense of the foreigners who are under siege.
And he's got this sort of amalgamated group of folks. He's got Russian soldiers and some Chinese loyalists to them and different Japanese. He's got all these different sort of groups, disparate groups that he's cobbling together to do this. He's 25 years old. It's remarkable. Finally, the Americans show up. To rescue them.
The Marines came.
The Marines came. God bless them. They're always timely. And so they make it through the Boxer Rebellion. And he obviously goes on to build wealth not only for his company but himself. And they actually find him so indispensable, the Chinese government actually, or Chiang actually turns over his shares because they're worried about the new regime is going to take their stuff away. So Chiang gives him control of the company. And he's a good steward of it. He doesn't take advantage of it. No. They wanted it to be adjudicated in the British courts because they felt like the Chinese courts would strip them of all their wealth. So that was a smart move on Chiang's part. Hoover never takes advantage of them. So he goes back to the States with Lou, and then gets an appointment at the Home Office in London. And then the unthinkable happens.
Right. One of the characteristics of Hoover was his transparent honesty, and that set him apart from a lot of the other wealthy men who were manipulators. And really, they provided some of the reasons why the Chinese revolted is because of some of the bad things that businessmen did.
Oh, sure.
But he was the exception, and even when he ran for president, his critics, one of the things they criticized him of was that he had 100 and some thousand employees in China, and they tried to accuse him of using slave labor.
Right.
And when it was investigated, found out that he paid them more than any other businessman in the Far East. Except
for the squeeze. The squeeze was that term for bribery. And it's an ancient custom. It's still present today in China, wherein you agree to a certain stipend for a certain amount of work, and then there's expected to be this extra slice there. They call it the squeeze. I don't know if that's the operative term anymore. We call it a bribe. But you had to maintain that, and he hated that because it was sort of an affront to his Quaker values. Right. And he tried to eliminate, but he never did. He had to play. And that's what you were speaking to earlier about how he adopted from the sort of the Quaker communal sort of world where everything was sort of myopically viewed. He had to operate in the real world, so he played the game a little bit, but he didn't like it.
One of the interesting things that I found about Hoover is all of his employees called him the chief. All the men that worked for him, he was just known as the chief.
Even later, right? When he was president.
When he was president, he was called the chief.
Right.
He was strict. He was self-disciplined. He was, in just looking at the situation, he was so far above everybody else in
Right.
ability, intelligence,
And forward thinking.
and everything.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, people did love him.
Yes.
He wasn't a great orator. He didn't get up and give speeches.
Lou was actually the speech giver for him,
His
right?
wife was much better
Yeah,
at it.
yeah.
And that's going to be a handicap in American politics. He's not going to be able to get up and give a wowzer speech.
Right.
And that
He had to
you
use
know,
surrogates to do all that work for him,
He
which
was
he was
always-
perfectly fine with.
He was always serious and
Right.
disciplined and honest. And things that don't go well with politics sometimes.
So-
Anyway.
So he makes it to London, and World War I breaks out, and
Yes.
sort of the tip of the iceberg, if you will, of when he's going to be considered to be one of the greatest men of all time, in my view, happens. So World War I breaks out. The European offices deny American credit, so people could not access their money. All the Americans in Europe. So what does he do?
Well, the First World War breaks out. All of Europe is going to commit this mass suicidal war. And the first thing the banks do is they deny foreigners the right to cash checks. They're not going to let their gold out of the country, and they're not going to cash checks. And there happens to be some 25,000 or so American teachers who have come to Europe for the Grand Tour, and World War I happens on their vacation.
1914.
They're in France in 1914, they're in France and in England, and they can't get home because the British Navy seals off the coastlines, seals off the British coastline, so nobody's going out, and they have no money.
And the Germans with their U-boats.
So it's suddenly become a very desperate situation, and that's just the American school teachers. There are another 100,000 Americans on vacation in England and France, so they're trapped by the war. And the American ambassador doesn't know what to do. I mean, the problem is unsolvable. And so he knows the chief is in town. His reputation has preceded him. Everybody knows who he is. And the ambassador comes to him and explains the situation and said, will you help us solve this insoluble problem? And Hoover said, I will do that.
Right.
And he got 5 of his lieutenants right away to set up tables over at the American legation at the what's it called?
Embassy.
Where the ambassador is, the embassy. And he put a couple $100,000 of his own money in cash on the tables, and any American that was caught and had no money could come and write a check to Hoover, and they would loan them the money. Hoover would loan them up to, I think it was $250, in order to be able to have a place to stay, place to eat, or food to eat in England.
That's about $2,000 in today's money. So it's,
Yeah, so it was a substantial amount of money,
Right.
and so he loaned it all out, and they would sign a promissory note or write a check. And ironically, when all of that was over with, and all the teachers got home, and all the other Americans got home, he was paid back all but like $130 of it. And
Yeah.
he was out.
Yeah,
He was out.
I
just
think
a little bit.
I think it was $300, but it was like out of all the money he loaned, ultimately millions. It was
Yeah.
it was a small little bit. So Germany had invaded Belgium, and then which was London's sort of sworn duty and oath to protect. So they enter the war. Germany takes over Belgium and decides they're going to feed their army and not the Belgians. So you have 7-8 million Belgians starving to death. And so he gets the Americans home, and then he gets called upon again in that moment.
That's right. He's told that in Belgium and in France, millions of people are going to starve to death in the next 6 months. And someone needs to organize a food rescue of these Europeans trapped behind German lines. Germans have seized Belgian industry, they've seized the farms, they're harvesting the crops and giving it to their own troops. And so he is approached by the British, actually, to come up with a plan, ask him if he would come up with a plan and organize a relief for Belgium. And ultimately, it's going to also be for France and any other countries that fall behind German lines. And he doesn't say yes right away. He said, I will sleep on it and give you the answer in the morning. And he considers through the night, comes down to breakfast. Lou says, what is your decision? His children are there around the breakfast table. And he said, I'm going to paraphrase what he said. Who cares about my fortune? So I don't care about my fortune. He knew that once he committed to this, he was going to have to spend, he might have to spend his entire fortune to make this happen. He knew it was going to be so costly.
Well, in fact, he gets up from the breakfast table and goes and cables the Chicago Mercantile and orders 10,000 bushels of wheat.
Right.
He
starts that day.
On his own credit.
On his own credit.
Yeah.
He starts that day. And in the United States, there was this huge surplus of agricultural products, wheat, corn, soybeans, lots of things. Meat, it's all piling up in warehouses because England has to import food, and eventually the United States, of course, is going to be involved in the war 2-3 years later. But there's this big backlog of food in the United States, and he begins instantly to order hundreds and hundreds, and eventually it's going to become millions of tons of produce. And then he buys ships to ship it over there. He goes to Congress, and he tells Congress he wants to borrow, I don't remember how much, $1 million, say, and eventually, of course, he pays it back with interest. So the government loans him extra money that he needs in this country to make it happen. And he mobilizes all these people that work for him in the United States and in England and wherever they are. He brings them into the picture, mobilizes this huge labor force, and then he goes to the Germans. And he said, here's what I want to do. I can feed the Belgian people. You have to give me permission to cross the borders. You won't bear the responsibility of 7 million people starving to death on your hands, 4 million children. And he has if a man ever had a soft spot in his heart for children, it was Herbert Hoover.
It was absolutely.
He
Herbert.
loved children. Yes. And 4 million Belgian children are going to starve to death if they aren't fed.
Larry, at that point, it was like within weeks. It was 2 to 3 weeks away from literally dying.
That happened.
There were people dying already. Yes.
He already has ships on the ocean coming
right.
With relief supplies,
which are being menaced, of course, by the Germans.
The U-boats. So he has to set up this entire system of relieving the starvation of Europe in the middle of the war. The Germans say yes, and Herbert Hoover becomes the only person in the world that has no borders.
Right.
He can go anywhere.
He can travel across any border unmolested by any either warring power.
He's above the war.
Exactly.
And he organizes this relief effort that saves the lives of millions of Belgians. And then France, the same thing happens. He does it in France.
But he's
for 4 years.
He's on his own, though. In other words, we'll let you do what you want to do, but we're not helping you. In fact, one of the more famous men in the world, or to be famous men in the world, the first Lord of the Admiralty. I always admire the British. They have these fabulous names for their folks. In other words, we're Secretary of the Navy, which sounds like this sort of aquiline person with their their stenography pad, but they're the first Lord of the Navy. It's Winston Churchill. Right. Winston Churchill was either jealous of him or he had some kind of he orders him to be investigated, and really harasses him. And so the foreign minister actually does the investigation upon the order of Winston Churchill, and he finds that not only was he not violating any ethical terms, he was actually giving of himself financially. So it actually sort of backfires on the young. They're the same age, by the way. They were born in the same years. They were born within months of each other, died within months of each other. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic.
And Churchill's going to give him a hard time in the future, too.
Right.
I mean, this is only the first time they're going to cross swords.
So he, as you mentioned, he saves 8 million Belgians from starvation, sure starvation. Then then the French start to feel because nobody is planting crops. In other words, so their entire agrarian society shuts down. So it gets worse and worse and worse. And not only does he have to feed them, actually got to put all the infrastructure in place, the railroads, the distribution lines, all the elements. He's got to maintain the political sort of negotiations, because people are intermittently hostile and not to him, and he's got to navigate that sort of horrible political realm. So he does that. The war finally ends. He becomes essentially Wilson wants him to be the food czar, but he thinks the name is ostentatious, so he said, "Call me the food administrator." So after the war, we have sort of the early Marshall Plan, if you will, not the one in World War II, but his was actually larger in scope. It doesn't get credit for that either. So he creates this wonderful, continues what he's doing, and it's called the ARA at that point, the American Relief Association, I think.
Right.
And so he keeps doing it and feeds a starving Europe at that point.
He saved the lives just during the war of probably about 14 million people. And then when the war ends, Germany is starving to death.
Right.
Germany's facing revolution.
Right.
Communist revolution has come to Germany. The people are starving.
Because the reparations put on them by the Allied powers were
Right.
so onerous, they couldn't pay the bill.
Yes, and Hoover believes the German people should be fed, and the British blockade is not taken off, and so food can't be gotten to the Germans. And he goes to Churchill, and Churchill says, "No, let them starve." And he goes to the Foreign Secretary. Foreign Secretary says, "We're not going to lift the blockade of Germany."
So Great Britain is still in the sort of the imperial mode, the sort of the colonial mode at that point. They're not
Right.
like they were in World War or after post-World War II.
Yeah, they're going to crush. They're going to crush
They're
Germany
gonna,
once and for all.
They're going to put the hobnail boot on them.
So Hoover goes to the king,
right.
and he says, "Mr. Churchill won't let me feed the starving." I mean, he lays out the problem and says, "I can solve this problem, but I'm getting resistance from."
He sort of had a resume at that point too. He knew
He
darn well
did.
he could do it.
The king said, "I will talk to Winston." So the king says he has a right to feed the Germans, and they take the blockade off, and he saves millions of lives of Germany, and probably in so doing also preserves them from being overthrown by communist insurgencies and revolutionaries in Germany itself.
So he forestalls Hitler a little bit, or a
little
Hitler-like person.
Hoover didn't. There are various aspects of Woodrow Wilson's policy that he did not like. He thought that Germany needed to be brought back into the family of nations quickly,
Right.
and not be
right.
forced to pay all these
He
reparations.
was a League of
and such.
Nations advocate, sort of tacitly,
He liked the idea of an organization
with some changes.
with changes that could keep peace. Hoover loved peace. He was a man of peace, and that's
He's Quaker, yeah.
what he pursued. At the same time, he was not a pacifist.
Right. He did pick up a gun during the boxing.
Right, and he believed that sometimes wars are necessary,
Right.
and but if there's an organization, an international organization that will work in helping keep peace, he was for that. So you're right. He agreed with Wilson's idea of creating a League of Nations, but modified fairly dramatically, because the Republicans at home were
Senator Cabot was
Henry
Clay.
Cabot Lodge becomes an enemy of Hoover's. He's the kind of the arch conservative Republican, and he doesn't want to give Wilson anything.
Right.
And but there are people in the middle that Hoover agrees with and works with. But in the end, the Treaty of Versailles is not signed by the United States, and the League of Nations doesn't. The United States never joins the League of Nations, and Hoover had a problem with the League, but he liked the idea.
Right.
Because he loved peace.
So we're getting now we're to the 1920s. He worked under the Wilson administration as the food czar, although he changed the name to food administrator because for the aforesaid reasons. Then Russia, you have the Bolshevik revolution,
Right.
and Russia. The peasants weren't really good at they didn't understand how to run industry and how to run a country.
Collectivization didn't work.
It did not work, and it didn't work for almost a half a century, but or more. So they actually get into Lenin is in a bad spot. He's in a pickle too. And who do they call on?
They asked Herbert Hoover if he can figure out some way to
feed the Russians. Now he's got to feed the
100
Russians.
million Russians while he's at it.
Right, and so he goes in there and he gets this sort of the same sort of tacit, I need you kind of thing, like a lawyer. Lawyers are evil until you need one, and Hoover was evil until you needed one. He goes in and he solves their dilemma and feeds 100 million Russians, 20 million of which were starving to death.
Yeah, and Lenin was flexible. Yeah, he wasn't as hardcore a Marxist as some of the other Bolsheviks were. Actually, he was somewhat more pragmatic. And
which history doesn't paint him that well.
No,
I guess because you look at that sort of him laying down in his.
The only place you see it though is him dealing with Hoover, and being willing to allow the United States to provide, all this excess food. So the farmers in the United States. When World War I ends,
they had ramped up,
and the food programs end. Eventually these food programs end in the 20s, and Hoover sees what's happening. Suddenly, farm prices
they plummet.
They plummet because they grow too much.
That's an excellent point, because we talked earlier about how he had foreseen in the beginning how he had foreseen two major crises. The first of which was he was trying to be the commerce. He was the commerce secretary for President Harding,
correct,
who had this wonderful way about him that he just dealt with the political and gave to people much smarter than him the actual physical and intellectual work that had to be done in the organization. So the farmers had been geared up to their main crops. The United States citizen lived off of almost exclusively meat. Meat was their main sort of dietary element. In Europe, it was wheat. But they also did cotton. So it was one or two things. It was cotton, wheat, tobacco of all things, because people needed the solace of a good smoke. God bless you. And so they had essentially done just the four mainstay crops, and they had been geared towards that, and they weren't planning things. Other things. As Commerce Secretary, he had this sort of row, I guess, with the Secretary of Agriculture, who didn't want him messing with his thing, and so he tried. Hoover tries to institute this plan of crop rotation, having idle land to allow it to regain its topsoil strength. Wanted them to plant fruits and vegetables and sort of get out of that mode of planting the four mainstay crops, so that it would stabilize the markets by not having so much of the same crops hitting the market at one time. And had they listened to him, the Dust Bowl would have been largely mitigated at that point, which is kind of an interesting thing. That was the one thing that he was prescient about. The other thing was he was warning the American bankers not to loan the European bankers money at such high interest rates. And it was like fish in a barrel kind of thing, where they were charging them outrageous interest rates. Everybody was getting in on the game, and Hoover knew that they could never pay the money back. And it wound up actually being the impetus for the Great Depression. So the irony is he's president during the sort of beginning of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. And he could have, if they'd listened to him, neither one of those events likely would have occurred, or certainly would not have been as severe as they were. It's just interesting how not only was he this great humanitarian, he was a forward thinker that was brushed aside.
Well, every president that has suffered an economic downturn, it's a result of his predecessor's policies.
Of course.
But he gets the blame.
Right. Yeah. Of course. So, well, let's go into the. So he feeds the Russians, and then the historians have tallied up somewhere between 80 million and 100 million people were alive. Lives were saved at that point. That is what one biographer, Nash, had written, that between 80 and 120 million people were living. And if you extrapolate that based on geometric birth patterns, what that means is there are over 1 billion people alive today. 1/7 of the world's population is living today as a result of one man, and that's Herbert Hoover. And that's why I said his grandmother on that West Branch Bank of the Mississippi. I made the understatement in the history of the world. It's remarkable when you think about the scale of one man who nearly died and his impact on the world.
Yeah, it's a remarkable thing, and he got interested in politics, and they couldn't really keep him out of the cabinet.
He never had any elective office, right?
Never had any elective office, and he's going to be elected president, having never been elected to any political office before.
Never stopped him in anything else before, yeah.
And he's going to be Secretary of Commerce, but he's going to have his finger in every other cabinet office somehow. I mean, he's such a powerful individual, not pushy, but he understands so much about a lot of different things. And he's wrong on some things, economically and such, but
he planted the seeds for the New Deal, right?
He did. But at heart, he was always a free enterprise individualist.
Well, he personified it.
He did.
He was a citizen.
Voluntary institutions,
right,
will solve the problems, and until he got one that seemed insoluble that way. And
well, to that point, something we didn't touch upon was when he turned over the reins of the ARA back to Congress. At that point, he had a $35 million surplus that he gave back, and he paid back every nickel that was ever given to him. In other words, he had somehow managed to make a profit in this enterprise, and most people in the nonprofit business nowadays brag about having 20% cost in their total revenue. His was 0.5%, half a point. Was the administrative burden on that particular. That's why so many lives were saved. It's truly, and he turned a profit when he gave back the American taxpayers their money. It's truly amazing. So he gets into, he gets elected in a landslide. They called him Landslide Hoover in the 1928 election.
Right, but Harding died in office,
right,
and Coolidge became president and then was elected on his own. Mm-hmm. And it's just the dynamics between Coolidge and Hoover are kind of interesting too. With those 5 years of those two men together is a fascinating, interesting thing. And Coolidge determined not to run again in 28, and so it left the field open. And Hoover had so many friends. There were so many people who believed so much in the chief and his accomplishments that they pushed him to become president. And
he warmed to the idea reluctantly, I guess.
And the election of 28 is fascinating because it pitted a Quaker for the very first time in American history against a Roman Catholic for the first time in American history, against Al Smith
right,
of New York.
Of New York, and he was quite popular in his own right.
He was very popular, and in fact, their political philosophies were not too far apart in reality.
Right.
So it boiled down to some other things. But the idea of a Quaker versus a Catholic presidential election was just outside people's comprehension, that it could never have happened prior to this, really. Right. And the next time it does happen again, 1960.
Right, Nixon.
Richard Nixon was Quaker, and John F. Kennedy.
That's amazing. Obviously, it was flipped.
The Catholic wins that time.
The Catholic wins that time.
The Democrat wins that time.
Right.
So,
interesting.
Anyway, yeah, it is fascinating.
So he's elected, and this is where
overwhelmingly.
This is an interesting thing to me because when the Great Depression happens, of course, he predicted it. He didn't predict the market crash, but he predicted right, that it was unsustainable for the American banks to loan high interest money to the Europeans who had no way to pay it back. So the Great Depression begins in Europe.
Right, the whole world was already crashed.
Asia was already flailing before that, and then there's nobody left to save the world because the American bankers had not been loaning capital to business here in the United States and to the everyday average Joe. They had been loaning money to Europe with these sort of starry-eyed notions that they were going to get paid back. And at that point, America, as Lincoln said, America's last best hope was not there for itself. And then you get the Great Depression. And then obviously he loses in a landslide. He becomes landslide Hoover the other way to FDR, who incidentally had recommended that he be president years before. FDR was a fan, but then obviously
Up until
right.
the election.
Politics intervened.
And he became the bitterest enemy that
Right.
anybody could ever have.
Right.
Right. So, so Hoover, well, the midterm election, Hoover's first 2 years, a year after he's elected, the stock market crashes and everything goes to pieces.
And the White House nearly burns down that Christmas after
That's
October
right.
is Christmas.
Right. And he springs into action. I mean,
Right.
this is his kind of situation in a
Right.
way, but it was so much bigger than anything that had happened in America previously.
Right.
And the big problem was jobs. So many people were out of work, and he came up with free enterprise government partnerships, creating work, creating jobs, creating programs that would disappear at some point, that they would come to an end.
Yeah, they had sunset provisions built in.
They
Of
did.
course, FDR borrowed the ideas, and then
But the New Deal didn't have any.
it was sort of an
thing like
eternal
that.
sunrise on it. It
That's
still
right.
exists today.
That's right. Once they got on the dole, they could stay on it forever.
Right.
And so he was highly critical when he lost the next election, which there was no possibility of his defeating Franklin Roosevelt. As they said, a yellow dog could have defeated Hoover.
Right.
And
The same way that.
so FDR rides in as the knight on the white horse, and to rescue the country with the New Deal and the bank holiday and all of that. And he hates and vilifies Hoover for the next 20 years nonstop. In fact, he runs against Hoover every single election. Doesn't matter who the Republicans put up.
Right.
FDR runs against Hoover. So the Republican Party caused the crash. The Republican Party made you lose your jobs.
Right.
Republican Party is going to let you starve.
Right.
I'm going to feed you. I'm going to give you a job, etc. And so Hoover becomes the villain, the chief villain of American history. In fact, FDR, in some ways, tries to erase his memory, except every 4 years, he digs him up again
Like the Soviets did.
and runs against him.
Yeah,
That's right.
After he saved all those lives in the 20s, they wrote poems about him and books about him, and the history books were pregnant with his sort of accomplishments. And then he winds up at Hoover's death in 1964, he winds up in the Russian history books as a knave and a spy.
Right.
He goes from the savior of the Soviet Union to Russia.
He does in America,
yeah,
too.
and he does. The same thing happens to him, although it's a little less sort of vitriolic.
It's interesting. One of the programs that he instituted was the building of the Hoover Dam in Colorado, damming up the Colorado River and creating the largest man-made lake in the world.
Which
and all
is
that.
another extraordinary project.
And it's called the Hoover Dam, and as is traditional, when a project begins in a president's administration, it takes on his name. And when FDR becomes president, he changes the name to the Boulder Dam because he doesn't want Hoover to have any credit for having built that.
Right.
And he even has his men go to post offices that have Hoover's name on the cornerstone and chips off Hoover's name and puts his own name in. Has his own name carved in post office.
Presidents can't be vindictive. That's impossible, right?
He has set out to efface Hoover's memory, but at the same time, he's going to vilify him every 4 years when it comes time. And Hoover spends most of the 1930s writing.
Right.
That's how he makes his.
Is that when he and Lou did the translation of that
Yes.
Georgius Agricola?
Right. It was a medieval book on mining that nobody had ever been able to translate into English.
Because all the mining terms were the writer Agricola actually invented, and
Nobody could figure out what they were.
So he and Lou had to actually do experiments, literal experiments, to actually find out what the result is, so that they could identify what that word meant, and they were then able to. It's really a remarkable thing. It took them 5 years, right?
Translated this medieval mining book from Latin to English,
and it's still the go-to.
Still used today.
Today, yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah. So he becomes quite the author. He published many books in his lifetime, and one of his most important books actually wasn't published till after his death, and that was his analysis of the FDR regime,
Right.
and it's powerful.
And he wrote those great books on liberty and rugged individualism and everything, because he saw what happens in the autocratic governmental realm, all over the world.
His book on liberty was a critique of socialism and of the New Deal and FDR. And
Right.
it's a terrific book.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we make it through. Obviously, his nemesis in FDR passes away. That same year, or very near, Lou dies in 1944.
Yes.
His lifelong partner
During the war.
During the war, and then, but he's called upon by the next administration and the next and the next. So they go back to him. Truman, Kennedy, Eisenhower.
He and Truman developed a very great, not just working relationship, but a deep respect for each other, a collaboration. That's right.
Right.
That he never had with FDR. In fact, Eleanor Roosevelt tried to reach out to Hoover a number of times, and FDR slapped her down. I mean, she wanted to use him for European relief. When World War II ended,
Right.
we had the same problem.
Yeah.
Except now it's 400 million people.
Right. The problem was larger, and yet.
Yes, but Hoover gets involved in that and in feeding the millions, and they call it the Marshall Plan. You know, it's part of a larger political thing that's going on. But Hoover gets involved in feeding Europe after World War II.
He'd already
also.
laid down the blueprint.
He
For
had.
that.
He was the man to do it, and it's interesting that Eleanor Roosevelt was willing to reach out to him a little bit, but FDR said no. He was a vindictive, bitter foe of anybody.
Right. So he spends a lot of time writing. His reputation slowly gets
He's the senior statesman in the Republican Party.
right. It slowly gets rehabilitated, but it doesn't quite make it to the history books, which is why we made this great cigar. One thing that I find extraordinary, that if fiction and truth were personified, fiction would cower at the feet of the truth of Herbert Hoover. His life was larger than any fictional character you can make, having saved tens and tens and tens of millions of people, having contributed wonderful humanitarian sort of exercises all throughout his life, up until his dying day, died in 1964.
Yeah.
The fact that he is not revered and studied in today's world is really a commentary on society today. I mean, I would venture to say that people even our age don't really know the truth about Herbert Hoover, and certainly
We found that to be true in Washington. You know, when we spoke at the White House Historians event,
Right.
that people knew nothing about Hoover. They
Right.
didn't even know that he was associated with them.
in the shadow of the White House, right there where we were. That's
Right.
interesting.
They knew absolutely nothing about it. Many didn't.
Well,
So.
thank you very much for your time. It's been
right.
wonderful. I appreciate so much you're able to shed light on such a wonderfully historic figure. I mean, he was truly the Ben Franklin of his time. His versatility and his love of life, his ability to extract hope out of even the most desperate situations.
Compassion for people.
It was sort of this golden thread that never was
No.
paled or shrouded. It's
Right.
truly amazing.
Yeah, it was remarkable. Man. And the Hoover Institute today is in Stanford.
Right.
As a conservative think tank, or
Right.
used to be.
Right.
And his memory certainly has been revered there
Right.
over the years.
We made this cigar with this wonderful drawing. We chose a sketch that my wife did, in fact, when he was 40 years old. This was the time when he was actually saving the lives of tens and tens and tens of millions of folks. And so we wanted to make sure that the representation on the cigar actually mirrored that time. When he was a young man. He was barely 40 years old, having acquired all those skills, and literally changed the lives of probably upwards of 1 billion people. Now, it's truly amazing.
To Herbert Hoover.
To Herbert Hoover.